Hi, welcome to this video about ROSA by Jolin Lab. ROSA or ROSA is like a multi-mode crossfader, scanner and something in between. You can use it for different purposes depending on the setting of this switch here. You can read all about the functionality in the extensive user manual. Federico did a really outstanding job on that thing. I'm really happy he did. Let's jump straight into having a look at the features on ROSA. There's a lot of things to demonstrate and I don't want to take up unnecessary amounts of your time. At the moment, ROSA is in scan mode, which is the uppermost position of this three-way switch here. In this mode you use ROSA kind of like a crossfader, but it crossfades between 4 inputs. You can do this using this giant and awesome feeling knob here. There's just the right amount of torque there. The LED is a really nice touch. Notice how I can keep turning this in the same direction. It's really an endless rotary, which is really cool to see. I don't think I have seen this before, at least not on an analog module. So you crossfade between 4 inputs. There's like a soft knee. The crossfade is kind of gentle unless you apply positive voltages at the knee input here. I'll do this in a minute. I first want to show you how it does not matter which one of the 4 outputs you use in this mode. They all send out the same signal. You can see this in like the schematic representation in the manual. So about that crossfade, you can hear like here we are in between 2 input signals, but when I send in a positive voltage, setting in 5 volt there, you will hear that the crossfade is no longer a crossfade, it's really just a switch. And when I turn down the voltage to 0, you can clearly hear that the crossfade is much more gentle, and this is across all 4 inputs, of course. We can control ROSA with CV as well. Let me send in a sample and hold wave to the CV input here. You can see and hear that nothing is happening. That's because I have to switch this switch here to CV. So the module no longer looks at the position of the knob here. It just looks at the CV, and we have a nice attenuverter here for that CV signal. We are getting abrupt changes here because I'm sending in a sample and hold wave, which is by itself really choppy. But let's switch this to a triangle wave and let's slow it down. With a really slow LFO going into the CV input, you can hear how ROSA crossfades nicely between 4 signals. And again, it does not matter which output we use. They all send out the same signal. So this is the first mode of ROSA, which is called scan. Let's now jump over the second mode and head straight to the third mode, which is pass. You can notice already that the signal is a lot stronger. But when I turn this knob ever so slightly, there's no longer any signal. I like to think of this mode as kind of a panning mode. It's not very hard to kind of remember that the pass mode is kind of a pan. And in practice on ROSA, this means that all 4 inputs are mixed together and sent to 4 outputs consecutively. So which one of the 4 outputs the mix of the input signals is sent to depends on the position of the knob or the CV signal that we apply to the CV input. So probably when I switch to another output, we will hear a signal right now, like you can see. But when I start panning with the knob, we lose the signal. Again, that's because the 4 signals on the input side are mixed together and then sent to one of the 4 outputs. You can use this kind of in quadraphonic setups, but you can just use this as a clever stereo panner. Let's send 2 of the outputs into my interface. Let's pan them left and right. So now I'm kind of panning between these first 2 outputs. And of course we can do this with bipolar or unipolar CV as well. Let's increase the speed of this LFO. And you can totally use audio rate signals as a CV source here. While you can use audio rate and slow rate LFO signals at the CV input, you can just as well send LFO rate signals into the inputs of ROSA instead of audio rate signals like I'm doing right now. You can even send in triggers, which we'll have a look at a little bit later. There's one more input here on ROSA. That's the shut input. If I send in a manual CV source here, you can see that by sending in 0 volt, the signal is completely shut down. And when we send in a positive voltage, let me use an LED cable here. So when nothing is connected to this input, this extra VCA is really bypassed. But as soon as we connect something, we're using the circuit. So when sending in 5 volt, the signal is let through, and this is completely independently of which mode you're in or what the outputs are doing and the inputs. This just goes on top of everything else. So when we turn this down, the signal is lost. We can send in like a random gate to this input. if I reconnect this LFO that I used earlier for auto panning. Let's slow it back down. Let's sync it to the clock. And let's add a kick drum. Let's go back to the first mode momentarily. So to do a quick recap, the pass or pass mode is like a panning mode where you send a mix of the input signals to one of the 4 outputs. The first mode, which is the scan mode, is kind of a scanner. You can also look at this as a crossfader. It crossfades the 4 input or between the 4 input channels and sends whichever output is active to all of the 4 outputs. So it does not matter which of the 4 outputs you are using. In fact, I can remove this cable here and center my channel again. And you can also hear that in this mode the shut circuit is also doing the same thing as before. Let's add back in the kick drum. Let's remove the signal going to the shut input. Let's now have a look at the center mode, which is the wave mode. In this mode, the inputs and outputs are linked together and they operate independently of each other, so it's 4 pairs of inputs and outputs. You can still kind of crossfade between them using the knob or using CV. But the signal going into the first input will never come out of the other outputs. It will only be present at this output, at the first output, and whether we're going to hear it or not also depends on the position of our knob. Let's reconnect the second channel here. And let's pan these outputs or inputs on my mixer again, just so we can hear better which output is active. So this one, the first channel, is sent to our left ear, and the second channel with the white cable is sent to our right ear. So there we have kind of a bass in our right ear. And when I move the knob, we have the chords in our left ear. So the channels stay linked, they operate independently of each other, but the knob position will decide whether the VCAs are open or not. This is different from the scan mode, in which it does not matter which output we use, we just crossfade between 4 input signals. And in the last mode, which is kind of a panning mode, we mix all the input signals and send those to the separate outputs, depending on the position of the switch. So because not all outputs are connected here, we're getting silence in between. And then again to the center or wave mode, you have this behavior that's kind of in between a crossfade and a pan. Or maybe it's just something completely else. As I said, the manual is quite extensive. Federico really did a great job on that. And there's quite a few sound or patch examples, I should say, in that manual. So I think it's interesting to have a look at a few of those. And those will give you a good idea on how you can use these different modes of operation to your advantage. One of the examples in the manual of ROSA explains how we can crossfade between different VCO outputs using the scan mode to create different wave shapes altogether. To morph seamlessly between different wave shapes, and well, by modulating the CV parameter, you can even create a new wave shape. Let's first remove the CV signal altogether. And let me explain a little bit what I did here. I connected 4 outputs of cycle 5 to the 4 inputs of ROSA. We're in the scan mode and we're monitoring 1 output. You can watch the output of ROSA as the green trace on the scope. By manually cross-fading between them, you can see how we morph beautifully between sine wave, pulse wave, saw wave and a triangle. And well, all the things in between are accessible, which is very cool. Now, as shown before, you can modulate this movement or this morphing with CV. But if you then connect a 5th output of the same VCO to the CV parameter on ROSA, and that's why the red cable is connected here. So I'm using a 2nd triangle output of my VCO to modulate the crossfade parameter on ROSA. By the way, this attenuverter for the CV input has a center indent, which is very useful. So let's open it up and let's see what beautiful sound wave comes out of ROSA's output here. So that's the new wave that we created. Let's now send in a volt per octave signal to the VCO. And let's add a kick drum. If we change the wave shape of the VCO output that is modulating ROSA, so the red trace here, on cycle 5 there's this vari-wave output that lets you morph between the wave shapes as well, just like we are doing with ROSA. So if we change this to another wave, you can see that the resulting output of ROSA changes completely. And instead of listening to the VCOs that I'm sending into ROSA, you can switch this to LFO rates to use ROSA to crossfade between different LFOs. Let me send an output of 3 body, which is slightly off screen there, through this filter here. So I can use the output LFO that we are creating with ROSA to modulate the filter frequency. Let's increase the speed of this LFO. When we remove the CV signal altogether, so ROSA is no longer being modulated, then we can crossfade between the input LFOs manually. Let's increase the speed a little bit. Anyway, I think you get the picture here. This is a really versatile setup. You can use this first mode, the one that I keep calling crossfading mode, but it's really scan mode. You can use it to crossfade between different triggers and gate patterns as well. Right here I have 4 different gate patterns connected to the inputs of ROSA, and we're monitoring them, well, one of the outputs on the scope. Let's have a look at them. So there was this busier pattern, and this is like 4 to the floor kick trigger pattern. And there's like a faster one going without any skips. And then we have, I know this is a divide by 1.3, so this is a really odd timing. And you can use these triggers or gate patterns for anything you'd like, but I'm using them to trigger an envelope generator here. And the output of that envelope generator is used to modulate my filter cutoff. So let's start crossfading manually here. And if you then use like a clocked sample and hold LFO to modulate the parameter on ROSA, you get really interesting rhythmical patterns. This is a patch using the wave mode, which is the center position of the switch here. This patch is really a mess, but I'll try to explain in a few words what's going on here. So I've sent an output of 3 body through a wave folder over here, then through a bandpass filter, and then the output of the bandpass filter is going into the BBD delay here, and then its output is monitored. And I've taken like the secondary outputs of the wave folder, the filter and the BBD delay and sent those to the 3 first channels on ROSA. I have a second output of my VCO going into ROSA as well. And then the outputs of the VCAs here on ROSA are routed back to like the FM input on the filter and the fault parameter on the wave folder and the time parameter on the VPD and the phase modulation input on the VCO. I did not think about what I connected where very much. I just connected the cables to see what sound came out of this patch. What we are doing now when we adjust this knob here on ROSA is allowing different feedback paths to become active. There is some modulation going on every module as well. I used Orbit 3 for that. It's just doing really slow modulation just so the patch doesn't become stale too quickly. Let's control this with CV. I'll just use a slewed sample and hold from weather drones. Let's open up this attenuverter. I think this is a really cool idea, and well, it's not my idea, it's in the manual that Federico wrote. Let's have a listen to a patch example using the pass mode on ROSA. For this example using the pass or pass mode on ROSA, I will be sending a mix of VCOs into the inputs. If you remember correctly, in the pass mode the inputs are just mixed together and then sent out of one of the 4 outputs depending on the position of the switch or the CV signal here. Let's briefly have a listen to the mix of VCOs that I will be sending in first. These are just 3 VCOs, one of them being cycle 5 with a little bit of modulation on the variwave output. Then I'm using 2 generate 3s. One is kind of the bass with a triangle, and then the other one is a saw wave that kind of follows the pitch of cycle 5 here. So I yet have to connect the VCOs to ROSA. So what is all this then? Well, I'm using all these outputs to send the inputs or the mix of the VCOs to different effect processors. One is going to a stereo delay. The other one is going into beats that I'm using mono. This one is going into this BBD delay, which I clocked with a very, well, relatively slow VCO to make sure it kind of sounds broken. You'll hear this in a second. And then the last of the 4 outputs is sent into a bandpass filter. So we won't be hearing the signal dry or clean at all, but depending on where I have this knob here, we'll send the mix of VCOs that we are sending into ROSA to the different effect processors. So let's send in the VCOs. And let's just start turning the knob here. And you'll hear how the audio gradually moves from one effect to the other. So this broken sound is actually the PBD delay that's being clocked very slow. This is a sound that I really like. So this is the bandpass filter, and then there's this spacious one. That's the reverb and the grains from beats. And then we should have a stereo one, which is stereo digital delay. But all of them are a little bit mixed together, since we're very rarely just landing on one effect. I think this is really, really lovely. I have a slewed sample and hold here that follows the clock of the sequence. It's not active because this switch is set to pot. So whenever the switch is set to pot, ROSA looks at what you're doing here, and it does not look at the CV signal, nor does it look at the attenuverter, and vice versa. When you switch it down, it only looks at the CV and the position of the attenuverter, and no longer takes notice of the position of the knob. So now we're modulating ROSA with a slewed sample and hold. This is going to be it for this video about ROSA. I think this is a really clever device that you can certainly use in some way or other in your setup. It's rather small for a device with these options. I really like the sturdiness of all of this knob. Well, it's not only an endless rotary, it really feels very sturdy. This one as well. I like this type of knobs. I know Federico used these on other modules as well. Really nice. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something. See you next time. Bye.